This is North of Normal, a podcast about Canadian cinema and our relationship with film. My name is Andrew Hunter Scholey, and today we are talking about Bon Cop, Bad Cop, released in 2006, directed by Eric Canwell, written by Leila Basin, Alexi Epstein, Patrick Huard, and Kevin Tierney. And today to talk about this film, I'm joined by Colin Everett. Colin, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to be here. How you doing?
Not bad. Before we start talking about this movie, let's take a second to introduce who you are. Who is Colin?
So yeah, I grew up in New Brunswick, moved here to Halifax straight out of high school. Did a lot of watching movies through the latter part of high school and out of my buddy's kind of big collection, and watching a lot of stuff out of the old Video Difference, which, rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Yeah, definitely. Just to explain really quickly, Video Difference here at Halifax was really a landmark for moviegoers. It only closed down, a couple of years ago?
Oh yeah, not long. And immediately the collection just scattered to the wind.
Well, no, a lot of it was actually donated to the Halifax Public Library.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Yeah, and every so often I'm trying to track down a movie and I just kind of type in out of curiosity. I'm like, that one was probably from Video Difference.
Yeah, a lot of favorites went to collectors. They did a big sell-off when they closed up.
Yeah, I think I even ended up getting the last couple of seasons of Deadwood out of that.
Nice.
Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, other than that, basically been living and working here for the last 10 years or so, and yeah, just keeping on. I sort of a delinquent artist from here and there, music, but a bit of writing here and there, but yeah.
Great. Okay, well, to start things off, what is Bon Cop, Bad Cop?
So Bon Cop, Bad Cop is a movie in which a grisly murder happens at the Quebec-Ontario border, and these two cops from the Ontario police and the Quebec police have to try and solve the case with all the attendant conflicts between the two of them. And basically has this weird pissing contest between the two divisions and the RCMP. At least that's where it starts. And then it gets into this whole weird personal grudge serial killer thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, essentially, it's a Canadian attempt at a buddy cop movie.
More or less. It's essentially Canadian Bad Boys.
Yeah, I thought Lethal Weapon, but 48 hours.
That's just
you take any of them, because they do fall in. I mean, just to point out, it was starring and written by Patrick Huard, who plays the Quebecois police officer, and Colm Fiore, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a little later, as Martin Ward, who, of course, is the stiff Anglo person there. So just a note, just to get a couple of facts out of the way right out of the gate, at the 27th Genie Awards in 2007, which, as we touched upon last episode, is, for lack of a better term, known as the Canadian Oscars. Colin, we touched upon this before. You had actually never heard of the Genies.
Not even once.
Which doesn't really surprise me. I mean, I remember with my parents once in a while watching the Genie Awards on TV here and there, but even as I grew up into a film fan, I kind of knew they existed and sometimes would know which ones won, but even though I watched the Oscars every single year religiously, even though I kind of hate them, just never bothered with the Genies. Maybe this will change that a little bit, but regardless, it was nominated for quite a few Genie Awards that year, but it won for Best Picture and Best Sound, which at first you think is kind of odd, but then you think about it, well, Canada doesn't produce too many big action movies, with lots of big explosions and stuff like that, which this one definitely works in. So I guess that kind of makes sense. I didn't even bother to look up what the competition was in the category that year.
I mean, I kind of believe it though. Just watching the movie, I remember there being a lot of interesting transitions between scenes with sort of diegetic and non-diegetic audio running together. There was some good design there.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of good stuff in this film across the board, definitely. So this movie has a couple of claims to fame here in Canada. It actually did pretty well for a Canadian domestic release film. On a budget of $8 million, it made almost $10 million, which is really good domestically. And this is a movie that I know a lot of people saw at home after its theatrical release. So not bad there. It's no wonder it got a sequel, which we may touch upon a little bit later. And the other fact that this movie tries to lay claim to, well, back with the budget, it claimed for a while that it was the highest grossing domestic Canadian film.
At least nominally.
It is. I mean, if you fudge, apparently it's still Porky's,
right,
which is still really weird. Whether or not I ever run out of enough movies to cover Porky's at some point, maybe that fact will come back up. Otherwise, we're tackling it here. The other claim that it has is that it claimed in a lot of places where I was researching that it was the first bilingual film of a release in Canada, 100% bilingual. Even in the recording process, they recorded it completely in English and completely in French, apparently. And it was afterwards in the editing room where they decided
which parts would be in which
parts would which, because, some of these scenes, they really do cut back and forth between the two languages. However, even that isn't true. I swear this is the only sidebar I'm going to get into this entire episode, but doing research for the show can be kind of weird, and you kind of unearth some really weird things. Apparently, what is the very first bilingual Canadian film and I'm probably not going to pronounce this right. It is a film from 1963 called Amanita Pestilens.
Okay.
It is also weirdly the first color film made in Canada.
Huh.
So for those facts alone, I find it really, really odd that I cannot find this movie anywhere.
Right.
Like, it's not available to stream online. I can't find even the fact that there was ever like a home video or DVD release of it. Now, I'm just going to read the synopsis. You're going to see why I want to see this movie. The plot concerns a Montreal suburbanite who becomes obsessed with his award-winning lawn, which has become infested with ground fungus. His neighbor across the street identifies the species as Amanita pestilens. The mushrooms prove impossible to eradicate, and the homeowner directs all of his efforts to getting rid of them to the exclusion of all else. His obsession very nearly destroys his life and leads to a deadly confrontation with his neighbor.
Wow.
Don't you want to see that movie?
Yeah, like that's, where can we find copies of that?
Like,
Part of me wonders if it was in the old Video Difference collection. I just never found it.
As far as I can tell, it's never been released anywhere.
Huh.
Apparently it was a complete flop. So just before we got into the nitty gritty of Bon Cop, Bad Cop, I wanted to throw that one out there because, that one sounds like a real fun time, for lack of a better term.
It does kind of explain why they thought they were the first bilingual film shot in Canada, because why would they have heard of that?
Yeah, I don't think when Patrick Huard came up with the idea for this film, his first instinct was to go onto Wikipedia and look up that sort of information. So now that we've had that tangent to the side, let's get back into this. Colin, now, before we decided to land on this movie, you did have another movie that you wanted to talk about. You were available to talk, and I kind of wanted to, because the last two episodes were both horror films, I kind of wanted to break it up a little bit, because what you want to talk about is ostensibly a horror film, kind of in an odd way. So you went away and you came back with this movie, Bon Cop, Bad Cop. Why was that?
Well, both movies kind of exist in the same space. I brought up Video Difference before. When I first moved to Halifax, I was maybe 18 years old. My brother and I would just make a ritual of just renting as many schlocky movies as we could from Video Difference. It was right across the street from us. So Pontypool and Bon Cop, Bad Cop were very much a part of both of those, of just that time in our lives. I think Bon Cop, Bad Cop was a better fit for me just because I think it has more to say about sort of the way we look at Canadiana than maybe Pontypool does. Pontypool is just kind of a horror thing of its own, and maybe there's more there. I haven't taken a look at it in a while. Bon Cop, Bad Cop just appealed to me more now, especially as a comparative point to then.
Yeah, out of all the episodes that we've done so far, this is definitely the movie that is the most about Canada. Like, you can't watch this film and mistake it for being anything other than a Canadian film.
Yeah, like it's just like bursting at the seams with kind of the, straight out of a Molson commercial hokey Canadianness, but also kind of a more earnest look at it. The movie is just pure provincial bickering between Anglo and Franco Canada.
It really is. And I don't want to say I'm sure there are other places in this world where there are the same sort of cultural divides of people living together, but not so government regulated.
Yeah.
I find it really hard. And the fact that this movie right from the get-go, when they first discovered the body, as you brought up, and they're both like trying to just pass it off on each other's jurisdictions. And that happens to fall not only on a provincial, like you get, in Smokey and the Bandit crossing state lines, and that sort of a thing. But here it's not just a political, practical thing. It's also, this sort of cultural divide.
Well, it's kind of, it's really telling about Canada that we, in our government, have a sitting party whose stated goal is separatism. Like that, it's baked into the DNA of this country of just to be at each other's throats, or at least digging each other in the ribs a little bit.
Well, and it leads to one of the jokes that I don't know if I'll actually say what it is, but leads to one of the biggest eye rolls for me in this, which, it involves a, shall we say, love scene later on in the movie, with chance of Quebec separation being taught to an Anglo that doesn't know what she's actually saying.
Yeah.
To talk about the whole sort of dialogue aspect of it, because, what the creation of this movie was. Patrick Huard, who plays David Bouchard in this film, also one of the screenwriters, he had the idea for this film after doing a bit at the 2003 Genie Awards, in which he played on cultural and linguistic differences between French and English Canada. He realized that what separates Anglo and Franco audiences also united them. And this is the quote, "The one thing that we can laugh about together is our differences." Which is a nice sentiment.
Yeah,
I suppose. And just to add, I was kind of disappointed. I kind of scoured online to see if I could find this bit from the Genie Awards, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I thought that would have been kind of interesting to see.
I don't imagine the archiving was very good on that.
No, probably not.
Yeah, well, it's telling that sort of pulling together by your differences. Half the plot is initiated by fighting to keep the case they're on out of the hands of the RCMP, which is the federal police.
Yeah, and even right off of the bat, I want to go back into the characters. You have Patrick Huard, who I use the analogy of Lethal Weapon is more of a Mel Gibson type from Lethal Weapon. He's kind of the rough around the edges. And then you have Colfiore as the more button up. I mean, one of my favorite gags in the movies is how his like dream is to get a desk job.
Yeah.
Which kind of comes up as a gag quite a few times throughout the movie.
I mean, if they're threatening his retirement, then he'd have to die at some point. So
yeah, fair enough. So, okay. So first off, being from Nova Scotia, how much interaction have you had with French Canada?
Very little. It's kind of weird. I don't think I realized how segregated at least the Atlantic provinces can be until I realized that I met my first Acadian friend at 24, and I had to leave my home province to do that.
So how do you think this movie actually handles these cultural relations? I mean, it's funny that you brought up one of the best jokes in the entire movie is actually in the setup when they are at the crime scene where, they bring up that, knowing how to speak French outside of, only in Quebec and certain parts of New Brunswick.
Yeah, I felt very seen by that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk about the actual setup of this film. And I hadn't seen this movie for a long time. I think it was pretty shortly after it had come out. And I do like a lot of this movie. I mainly like the two leads. I think they have a really genuinely good chemistry. I mean, I think we have touched upon before, not in this episode, but as friends, we both love Colfiore.
Oh, yeah. I have a deep, unending love for everything Colfiore does.
Well, let's talk about Colfiore for a second then, because we're talking about these two actors. Unfortunately, I mean, like a lot of the people working on this film, big careers in Quebec. This is kind of my first exposure to them from the director down to Patrick Huard. Mm-hmm. Who apparently starred in a very successful series of hockey films called The Boys.
It's what was interesting, sort of just doing a quick Google search of just, finding potential movies to talk about here. Every time a movie out of Quebec came up, you started seeing a lot of the same names, him especially.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And to go into Colfiore is that special type of Canadian talent where I know my experience. I was trying to think of where I had first seen him. It might have been the movie The Wrong Guy starring Dave Foley and him. Actually, no, it was actually probably before that point. Is another one of my absolute favorite all-time movies, 32 Short Films About Glenn Gould. But I think I saw it so long ago, I had no idea who Colfiore was.
Right.
And then when I finally rewatched it, it was after seeing The Wrong Guy. And I was like, oh, so the guy who's really good at pulling himself up into vents.
Yeah.
One of the best gigs from The Wrong Guy. Again, hopefully going to cover The Wrong Guy so we can talk more about Colfiore's brilliant career.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just it. I mean, he's a very private guy. I mean, one of the only real established facts about him, other than his IMDb list, is that he spent 17 years at in Stratford, Ontario, doing Shakespeare plays and these sort of, working himself up from a background player all the way up to a leading guy. And even still, going back every few years for productions. But I mean, he's one of those actors that even if he pops up in a really kind of shitty movie like Thor: The Dark World, underneath a lot of makeup.
Wait, was he? He was in the first one. Was he in the second one?
That is my mistake. He's in the first one. Those first two Thor movies totally blur together. But still, point being is the fact that when he pops up here, hey, it's Colfiore.
Yeah.
And you wonder if anybody outside of, or even most people in Canada, really pay attention to who this guy is.
He's a good time in that second Chronicles of Riddick movie. First one, I don't know. After it was not pitch black anymore.
Yes, it is in Chronicles of Riddick that he's in.
Yeah.
But anyways, in this movie, I do really like their chemistry a lot. Now, this leads into basically the scene setting of the movie, which is one of the aspects that I kind of don't like about it. I understand a movie doubling down on the bilingual buddy cop thing. I actually think it's a really clever sort of way to throw a twist on the buddy cop idea. If some Canadians are going to go and be like, we're going to make our buddy cop movie, that is a great thing and a great concept to roll with. And I think for the most part, it plays out really well. I like how they spend equal time between Montreal and Toronto. So you get those two different sides playing off of each other. And in the same way, you also get the dynamic of both of them being out of their element, but also the way that their families separately play off of them. Mm-hmm. So you not only get the sort of family relationship being established with the individuals and their family, but you also get what the sort of other type of opposite personality type bouncing against the same friends and family, kind of what happens there.
Yeah.
Which I think is really, really interesting. But that being said, the one thing that really doesn't work for me, the whole hockey serial killer thing.
Yeah, that kind of
doesn't work for me at all.
It was the loosest of possible setups to just have them kind of bounce off each other. I mean, I think you and I had discussed previously that neither of us really gives that much of a shit about hockey.
Yeah, we're going to peel the curtain back to anybody listening from outside of Canada, this giant curtain that surrounds Canada. We're going to peel that back, and you're going to be let in on a little secret. Not every Canadian likes hockey.
Yeah, some of us are dorks.
I wasn't raised on hockey. Neither of my parents liked hockey. I'm not a fair weather hockey fan. I don't watch at playoffs. But that being said, that's not why I don't like this. I mean, I do really like some movies that are hockey movies.
Oh, sure.
I consider two of my favorite movies of all time to be Slapshot and another hopeful future podcast episode, Goon.
Mm-hmm.
I really love the movie Goon a lot.
Quick aside, Goon is real good. It infuriates me when they show shots of Halifax and then scenes that are not shot here.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that comes up, especially when we cover that in a future episode. Of course, when I first saw Goon, I wasn't living here yet, so that didn't really cross my mind. I just kind of took everything for granted. So it's not that it is hockey, because I also understand that hockey is a big thing. It's just when you're having this movie that is about, cultural differences and bilingualism, it just seems like an easy, cheap way to just kind of, it's not even to get a laugh. I mean, there are a lot of hockey jokes throughout the whole movie. I mean, to note, you have, Rick Mercer doing his best Don Cherry.
Which is not a very good Don Cherry, to be real.
Well, it's kind of Rick Mercer doing his Rick Mercer thing.
Yeah.
And again, for anybody not in Canada, because I think only if you've ever lived in Canada, you would even know these two names that we're talking about. Rick Mercer kind of had a sort of Tonight Show type, not Tonight Show, the Daily Show type show.
Sort of, yeah. But
With a lot of political commentary and stuff.
A lot more PG.
Yes, definitely a lot more PG. He was known for his rants. And Don Cherry is, the worst aspect of hockey?
I mean, yeah, he's your racist grandfather given a regular TV show.
Yeah. So just a little bit of context there. Even though we don't like hockey, we still know who these people are.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why a lot of sort of centering this on a whole like hockey serial killer thing still kind of works, because no matter whether or not you care about hockey, it still plays. Like you're aware of all these cultural touchstones.
Well, this is one of the big things when I was doing the notes last night. I think one of the reasons why it doesn't work for me, not to kind of backtrack myself a little bit here, but I do think it is still kind of unnecessarily an aspect to shoehorn in. I think you could have had almost any other crime. I don't think they needed to lean into that comedically. You know what I mean? To still have a really good comedy. But the other aspect I think that occurred to me last night was that this movie is really ahead of the curve of the idea of toxic fandom before it really became a thing. And I realized that the sort of spoilers about this movie, I mean, you kind of know this at the very beginning. The serial killer in this movie is a dude who wears a hockey mask and tortures people that are responsible for bad things happening in hockey, like players being traded to the States, teams being moved to the United States, ruining the purity of the game, I think is what he says in it.
And in the strictest, most personal definition of what that means.
Yes, exactly. But I realized that in a different context, this guy could be some jerk who is killing people because he wants the Zack Snyder Justice League cut, or is pissed off because a girl uses a lightsaber in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that type of toxic fandom drives me up the wall. So I think that kind of tainted my viewing of it a little bit, because I was just looking at this dude and not finding it funny that he's a hockey themed serial killer,
because it's just
serial killer movies for the most part don't really work for me, but it kind of just reminded me of that toxic fandom that I just really don't like. So Colin, we've already talked about a lot of the sort of concepts and themes of the film. I mean, let's be honest, it's not that complex of the film. It really rides off of the cast of and chemistry of the cast quite a fair bit. It doesn't have a lot new to say about the action movie at all.
Yeah, it sort of trades in cliche to set up these two guys to bounce off each other.
Which overall isn't a bad time.
No.
I did overall enjoy watching Bon Cop, Bad Cop again after all these years. And I think it does, for the most part, hold up as an action movie. Again, with the only real weak part being the bad guy, especially at the end.
Yeah.
Where you have this sort of final confrontation with said serial killer. But do you have any, what do you think about Bon Cop, Bad Cop?
I guess Bon Cop, Bad Cop, especially revisiting it after having seen it the first time, I guess as someone who grew up sort of more earnestly embodying or trying to sort of internalize a very hokey, straight out of a Molson Canadian beer ad Canadiana and a weird, I guess, patriotism, it's interesting to come back to a movie that sort of, I felt like embodied that the way I had it in my head. And now that I'm a lot more cynical towards that, actually kind of still speaks to where I'm at now, especially with how much petty bullshit there is in it.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good take on the movie. I mean, I'd be really fascinated to see what somebody who wasn't Canadian thought of this film, because it did apparently pretty decent numbers outside of Canada. It wasn't a huge blockbuster by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd be really interested to see what somebody would have to say about it, or if they just want to get, I mean, it speaks volumes that most of the Wikipedia page about this movie is explaining all these sort of Quebec cultural references.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like a lot of it, and I don't know, maybe this is sort of the bias of looking at American media from the Canadian side, but I feel like this movie would very much play with the kind of earnestness that a lot of the weird narrative around Canada that comes out of the States.
Okay, this leads to an interesting part then. The episode so far, I've asked, what do you think this movie says about Canada? And it's a little early, but maybe this is a really good place to go right now. Before we get to that, just to quickly state, there is a sequel to this Bon Cop, Bad Cop 2. Nothing else.
I feel like there should be some kind of pun subtitle to that, and it's a real shame that it doesn't have one.
Yeah, but you have not seen it.
I have not.
I saw it doing research for this film. This movie was on Netflix. It was really easy for me to see, and part 2 was on there. So it was right after my first watch where I just kind of go in cold. I'm not making notes or anything like that. So I was like, sure, I'll throw in Bon Cop, Bad Cop 2. Overall, I kind of liked it more, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Because, well, it doesn't have the whole hockey aspect that I didn't like about it. And it's more playing the two of them up against American culture. And it's a shame that they waited, like 11 years, but whatever. I just want to say right now, it might be a while before I cover Bon Cop, Bad Cop 2. There's a lot of great Canadian films out there, so might be it for a while. But I just wanted to touch upon it. It's kind of cool that it did make enough money that eventually they made a sequel.
Yeah, although it's very much on brand that the second one is about kind of them against America, because I mean that's like the story of Canadian media since we started subsidizing it to be like, please be less American.
Well, in the sort of unimaginative nature of, if they're going to have a serial killer, have him hockey themed, having the sequel being not versus against the States, but having to work with American cops.
Right.
That seems to be the next natural, I don't want to say lazy, but easiest.
Yeah, like
it's thing to throw against our protagonist.
It feels like kind of a natural progression.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, we brought it up. What is usually the final question of the podcast, but it's come up a lot about what somebody outside of Canada would think about this movie. So it just makes total sense to ask you, like, what do you think this movie says about Canada?
I think as someone living in Canada with more of an inside perspective, it spends a lot more time, like, in a very hammy action movie kind of tone, but actually portraying the kind of interprovincial petty infighting. I mean, this movie could be at least as crazy or more if you like threw a farther west cop in here, somebody from Alberta or something. Like you had to throw a cowboy in the mix.
I'm surprised he didn't go the Lethal Weapon route, and then with future sequels, just throwing a different guy from a different province and seeing how that kind of screws with the dynamic.
Yeah. Like, well, let's like just go like one province west at a time. I don't know what Manitoba would add. Sorry, Manitoba.
We'll cover that when we do the episode about FUBAR. But, for people that are not Canadian, what do you think, other than the political infighting that they would find out about our country?
I mean, as an outsider, you probably wouldn't honestly learn that much. I think it's drinking pretty deep in the well from, like you brought up the whole hockey serial killer plot. Like it plays with enough earnest cliche that I think as an outsider, it probably wouldn't say a whole lot to you. I think it's only if you're sort of looking for a different read as someone who already grew up steeped in these cliches and sort of has some inclination to buck against them. Like them bickering would just be two cops who don't get along bickering. It wouldn't be, oh yeah, of course these two guys being from where they are, being part of the police forces specifically that they are from, would bicker this way.
And of course the bilingual nature of the film, and I did really appreciate that a lot. It was a movie, I mean, aside from having subtitles, a lot of the dialogue is so snappy, I found that, I couldn't be checking my phone a lot during it.
No, well, especially speaking of bilingualism, I wonder if you can get more out of this movie if you are fully bilingual, because there's the scene where they're really high and they're getting chewed out by their captain,
which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Actually,
it's so
actually really, really funny.
Yeah, and Colm Feore's character Ward, his French is just falling apart because he's so high, and it took me a minute to realize that because I had to read the subtitle and then go like, oh wait a minute, none of that sounds right.
And of course, all the cultural references as well. As I said, this was, I don't want to say mainly a Quebec production, but definitely a lot of the people working on it, have that sort of French background.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, Colin. Like I said, I don't think it's a bad movie. I just don't have too much more to say about Bon Cop, Bad Cop. Do you?
Honestly, like it's, I have feelings about this, but at the same time, it's still kind of it's a thin movie that I found things in because I was looking for them.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think I'm happy it's out there.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I wouldn't tell anybody not to watch it.
And I think a lot of my enthusiasm for it comes from that I do find something kind of more substantial in there, but also I have a deep, deep love for things that are kind of dumb and a lot of fun.
Well, I'd be really curious to see what your opinion of the sequel is.
I really got to go spend some time with that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for being here, Colin. It was kind of fun to tackle a different type of movie on this podcast. In the very early days of the podcast, we're kind of gradually getting to these different genres and types of film.
Yeah, I mean, action movie schlock, deserves to have its day.
And looking forward to getting you back for some of those other films we talked about covering.
Be happy to be here.
All right. North of Normal is a podcast of Eldritch Creative, which can be found on Facebook at Eldritch Creative and Instagram at eldritch.creative. This show can be found at North of Normal on Facebook and on Instagram at North of Normal Pod. Intro music is by Dad vs. Son out of Hamilton, Ontario. That's it for now. Be safe.